Hello, Comment29 here, another Topic of the Week video, and this week I'll be talking about morality in Avatar The Last Airbender and Star Wars. This week's topic was submitted by grimaulkins, and her topic is, can you discuss the differences and similarities between how morality and the dichotomy of good versus evil are explored in the Avatar The Last Airbender universe and the Star Wars universe, and what overall message about these subjects the narrative was trying to get across in each story? So, okay, there's a lot to talk about. So, if you ask me, I think that in terms of the way a lot of these things were portrayed in Avatar The Last Airbender are a lot more similar to the original trilogy of Star Wars than the prequels. I'll touch on the prequels a bit later, but the prequels tell a different story than the original trilogy, and to be honest, things are a little bit more on the messy side in terms of, the situations that we're set up with, but there are a lot of similarities that you can pull, and I've actually mentioned similarities between, Avatar and Star Wars before. One of the things that really sticks out in terms of morality, and I really think that this, that this really sticks out in both Avatar and Star Wars, was the main character's refusal to kill the main villain out of a sense of, their own morality. In Avatar The Last Airbender's case, it was Aang refusing to kill Ozai, even though everyone around him was telling him, you gotta kill him to end the war. Aang's just like, that's not how I was raised, those aren't my morals. And, and as the last air nomad, and the one who ultimately has the burden on his shoulders to continue his own culture, shoot, can he really kill someone, even if they're evil and monstrous like Ozai? He'd be giving up his own culture and going against his own core moral values. Ultimately, he chooses not to and takes a third option, in which case it's debending Ozai, taking away what made Ozai so dangerous, which was his bending, and leaving him as a broken husk, which is a fate worse than death for someone like Ozai, who had all this enormous power, being reduced to just a bum who lived in a cell with no power, none of the great firebending power, none of the stuff that he relied on to control and fight. And for someone like Ozai, yeah, that is something far worse than just killing him. In the original trilogy, specifically focusing on Return of the Jedi, Luke took a moral stand against being told that he had to kill Darth Vader for numerous reasons. One was that Darth Vader was his father. And, he's like, and it's even more important to understand that Luke has lost his family. So finding his father, even if his father is kind of an evil monster, you can understand why Luke would latch onto this in a similar way that he was finding out that Leia is his sister. He's like, oh, I have family. Says, my aunt and uncle were brutally murdered by the Empire, but I do have family. Another thing is that Luke doesn't just want to kill. Well, that doesn't mean Luke didn't fight at all, and as you see with Aang, that doesn't mean he never fought, even though he's technically more pacifist. He just didn't kill, and he didn't go out of his way to go and hurt people. He didn't, because it wasn't like with Zuko, when Zuko was fighting, he was just like, for a good amount of the series. But, despite the fact that he was being told by Obi-Wan and Yoda, gotta kill Vader, and he's like, no, I'm not going to. And he sensed Luke sensed that there was some goodness deep down in Vader, that there was a sliver of Anakin Skywalker somewhere deep down inside of Vader, that, and because of that, Luke believed that he could bring him to the light side, that he could redeem Darth freaking Vader, because he was his father. And he was right. Much like Aang, sticking to his morals and sticking to his principles and his own goals, instead of changing it based off of what the people were telling him, even like Aang going against his own past lives, and Luke going against his mentors and teachers. They both succeeded in their goals. Luke technically beat Luke beat Vader in the same way that Aang beat Ozai. But when the moment came, they didn't kill them. Now this plays out a little bit differently in each case, in that Luke, realizing that Palpatine wanted him to lose it, wanted him to fall to the dark side, to give in to his anger and hatred, and just become a raging monster, so that he could corrupt Luke in the same way that he corrupted Vader. But then Luke realizes this and tosses his lightsaber aside, and this is where you get his iconic line of, "I am a Jedi like my father before me," and just mocking the Emperor for failing in trying to convert him to the dark side. And when the Emperor just starts zapping him, it's like, all right, then I guess you'll just die. Then Vader sacrifices himself to kill Palpatine, ultimately showing that Luke got through to his father. He stood by and was constantly trying to, save his father. He stuck to his own morals. He wasn't going to kill his own father, and even when he got that close to doing it, he pulled back. This isn't what he wanted. This isn't what he was going to do. And something that's admirable about Luke as a character in Aang 2 is, you don't have to corrupt your own morals in order to win. Because, as you know, in Star Wars, this is the path to the dark side. You start, doing those horrible things, and you see with Anakin, sure, he was doing some horrible things to save his wife, but ultimately he ended up becoming so corrupted that he almost killed his wife, the person that he turned to the dark side to in the first place. So, in Star Wars, you have a very strong dichotomy of the good guys and the bad guys. You've got your good guys. You've got Han, Luke, Leia, ultimately Lando. You have other characters, Mon Mothma, and all those other characters who are the good guys. Then you've got the bad guys. You've got Darth Vader, Palpatine, Imperial officers and stuff. And they draw a pretty significant line of good guys, bad guys, and they very rarely really waver from that. And that's because a lot of Star Wars, as envisioned by George Lucas, falls a lot into sort of the fantasy. It very much, plays on the traditional ideas of good versus evil, rather than some of the more morally gray stuff, which are things that were delved into a little bit more in the prequels, which I said I'll talk about in a little bit. Avatar: The Last Airbender also does something very similar in that you have your good guys and you have your bad guys, but there's a little bit more of a grayish area in this, because while there are clear bad guys and good guys, they do go to show that just because someone is technically on the side of good doesn't mean they are good people. Like you saw that one Earth Kingdom general who is willing to put Aang through severe emotional trauma just to get him to activate the Avatar state. Or you had the Dai Li, who technically they were just trying to preserve peace in, Ba Sing Se, even if that meant making people disappear or kidnapping and brainwashing them. Yeah, some messed up stuff. And conversely, you saw that even though the Fire Nation was this, almost seen as this monolithic source of evil, who did all this horrible stuff, when you go into the Fire Nation, you saw that there were just normal people there. This is why one of the episode, The Headband, is so great and one of my favorite episodes in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Because you see there are these kids who are given propaganda into believing that the Fire Nation is great, even though they were, one, the instigators of the war, and two, are trying to conquer it for power. And to fulfill Sozin's disturbing ideas of spreading the glory of the Fire Nation. But there are still good people there, and there were still people that were nice. And this is one of the reasons why you get to see all those students, and you get to see that even some of the teachers there were just ignorant, not evil. And you actually see a lot throughout the series that there are different, there are some people who are in the Fire Nation that they're not evil. Some of them are probably just doing their job. All those Fire Nation soldiers are fed the same propaganda that everyone else is. So it does make the issues a little bit more morally gray. Oh, Hama's also a good example of this in, Book 3. Book 3 does a lot of interesting stuff with this. In that you have someone who is a waterbender who was kidnapped and taken by the Fire Nation, and from someone who Katara was learning from, ultimately found that she had become just as twisted and evil as the people that she fought against. Creating bloodbending, which is shown as one of the most horrifying skills in Avatar, because you're controlling someone through their blood. Ugh, it's creepy. This was developed by someone who was technically a good guy because they were a waterbender. Now, Hama was good once upon a time, and it's obviously that in the years she has become corrupted and twisted and, frankly, so monstrous that she wanted to see other people use blood. She was delighted to see Katara, who didn't want to use bloodbending, be resorted to have to use it in order to save Aang and Sokka. There's some twisted stuff. And more on the villain side, you actually saw that, or people like Mai and Ty Lee, they weren't evil. Azula was pretty bad, but even then, it was more so because of how she was raised. You have a lot of the stuff that was going on with Ty Lee, Azula, and Mai, and it's shown that Mai and Ty Lee were forced into this. And the big turning point was really in the Boiling Rock storyline, where Mai and Ty Lee ultimately turn on them, and they do ultimately become, one of the good guys once everything is all said and done. But, they did act as villains, or I guess the better word is antagonists for the, when they were first introduced. So you have some more morally gray stuff going on. In the original trilogy of Star Wars, there was less of that. I mean, you had the stuff with Lando, an old friend of Han, who turned out to have sold them out to the Empire. Well, because, when Darth Vader shows up on your doorstep, you don't just say no if you want to live. So, you have that whole situation, but Lando ultimately does end up helping them out and joining the good guys, and he's instrumental in helping, defeat the Empire later on in Return of the Jedi. So, but the prequels are ones that have some more similarities in terms of the more gray aspects of, Avatar: The Last Airbender. I wouldn't really say that there was a whole lot of morality things that were going on in the prequels. They did tell a bit more of a darker and more complicated story than the original trilogy. They blurred the lines a little bit more, particularly because of the whole things with the Equalists. What am I saying? Equalists. Thinking of Legend of Korra. The Separatists fighting against the Republic. And this whole war was instigated by one man, Palpatine. And he was manipulating everyone across the entire trilogy. Slowly but surely, year after year, piecing together his Grandmaster plan until he was in the right position to, one, turn Anakin to his side and make him his, obedient servant. And then, two, he was able to wipe out the Jedi and then establish his empire, where he was, completely in charge and had everyone bowing at his feet. So while you do still technically have, good versus evil, the whole situations are a lot more complicated. And Avatar: The Last Airbender does do this more than, I would say, the original trilogy did. Because while you did have some things, like Han Solo's whole story about his whole code of morality was I look out for me kind of a thing. It was self-centered, and he was looking to get a good paycheck, and he was looking to get a good score. He cared about himself, Chewie, and the Falcon, and that was about it. But his code of morality did change over the course of A New Hope, where he ended up going against his more selfish nature and coming back to help, and then ultimately joined the rebellion as a general and stayed with them and fought with them. Even if he said otherwise, you can tell he did deeply care, and he stopped caring just about himself and chewing the Falcon. It was, okay, there's more to do than just sit in my own little corner and let all the pieces fall where they may. Avatar: The Last Airbender does show a lot of those gray stuff, even in the first season, before they start really digging into some of the more serious stuff. Because you saw in Paku in the Water Tribe, in the Northern Water Tribe, where you saw that even though Paku was, again, a good guy, he was kind of a sexist dick. And he wasn't going to train Katara because, well, women don't learn fighting, women learn healing. And, and even though Katara is also good at healing, no, she also wanted to fight. And, he got mad when he found out that, Aang was taking his lessons and teaching them to Katara so that she could still learn it. And that's a pretty messed up thing. Ultimately, he did get character development, but, you still have that messed up stuff coming from technically a good guy. In the prequels, and especially when you get into, like, the Clone Wars series, where you start seeing a lot of this stuff, the whole Clone Wars section is very much more in the gray than it is the black and white, even though the Force is overall shown as you have the light side are good and the dark side is bad. You have a lot of things are really messy in the prequels. It's hard to pinpoint an exact good or evil. There are good people and there are bad people. Grievous, even Dooku, having joined the Sith, are obviously bad. Darth Maul was bad. Excuse me. And, they had no qualms with going after and killing people, even if they were, no matter if Dooku tried to say he was doing things for better reasons. No. The red lightsaber? No. So while it does establish there are good guys and bad guys, the whole situation is shown as a lot more morally gray. One thing I do like, though, is that you do see the Jedi, who, while they are good, they are too rigid and they are too stuck in their own ways. And I talked about a bit this in my last video, talking about the Grey Jedi, where the Jedi, while they are on the side of good, were ultimately manipulated by Palpatine, the bad guy, into fighting a war with the side that he also created, using clones that he had set up to fight against the droid army that he also set up, so that he could have everyone in the exact place he needed them so that he could wipe out the Jedi. It's messed up. But you also have some interesting questions that are brought up. And this is something that I didn't think about this until someone, was asking, when someone brought this up and ended up, engaging in a bit of a discussion about this, such as when Mace Windu has Palpatine, on the ropes, and he could very easily kill him, and then Anakin comes in. Would killing Palpatine have corrupted him at all and making him fall to the dark side? I mean, it's obviously that killing a Sith doesn't turn you to the dark side, because Obi-Wan killed Darth Maul for good reasons. Darth Maul was an evil monster who killed Qui-Gon and would have gone on to do more bad things, so, he killed him. But this brought an interesting question. Well, maybe. If you really think about it, morally, obviously, so you could say killing is bad, but in some cases it's justified. You can very easily justify killing Palpatine in that, well, this guy is a monster who's behind all of the horrible stuff. All of this bad stuff that's been going on, it's Palpatine. He's the center of it all. He's the source. He's been creating all of these horrible things that have been going on. So you can justify killing him to stop this. Anakin points out that it's technically not the Jedi way, especially after Palpatine has been disarmed. But then again, Anakin did literally disarm Dooku and left him without any hands and still killed him. Now, I think we all know that the only reason that Anakin was defending Palpatine and not killing him and letting him be tried was because he wanted Palpatine to live so that he could fulfill his, all of these vague promises about that, he could help Padme. Because Anakin's not one to follow Jedi Code, and, the Jedi Code did have its own faults. So you did see that the good guys did have faults, and while there was less, there wasn't really so much of there were actually good guys on the bad guy side. A lot of the stuff that, a lot of the separatists, you can see they genuinely wanted to get out from the Republic. And in that case, there's really not a good or bad answer. But all this was manipulated by Palpatine in the first place, so then you get a lot of discussions. There are a lot of interesting things to go on, and that's not even delving into the actual Clone Wars show, where you have a lot of stuff going on. And particularly another interesting episode was that one episode where you found out that there was one of these Jedis who was crazy and was pitting his clone troopers against each other for kicks and giggles. Yikes. And yeah, just because he's on the side of the good guys doesn't mean that that automatically makes them all purely good. Some very complicated stuff. So even though you can easily, for like the original trilogy and for the most part in Avatar: The Last Airbender, you have your good guys and you have your bad guys. You have a pretty strong dichotomy of you're either a good guy or you're a bad guy. But you did see that didn't it wasn't absolutely a hard case for everyone. Even people who were on the bad side, technically, like Lando, he wasn't an evil person, and ultimately, he's not a bad person. He doesn't want to betray everyone, but he was doing what he felt was right. What he was doing to try to protect people that he cared about, just trying to protect Cloud City. Ultimately, when he realized that you don't make deals with the Empire because they will screw you over. Well, the famous line, "I'm altering the deal, pray do not alter it any further." Yeah, you realize, maybe I shouldn't have done this. And Lando ends up helping them. And in Avatar, you have a lot of, these more gray elements thrown in. So while you do have, Azula is bad, and like Iroh says, she's crazy and she needs to go down, that even if she is family, she's still doing some bad stuff. You need to stop her. And Ozai, bad, had to go down. Zhao, bad, had to go down. You have a lot of these, bad guys who are bad, and they needed to be stopped. And you have some people who are good, and they still needed to be stopped because, shoot, they weren't all good. And I like seeing that. I mean, both stories I feel like, both approaches I feel are equally valid in the terms of the story. Because, obviously not everyone who's on the side of good is always going to be absolutely pure good. And this is also something that's touched on in Rogue One, where you had that one guy who was Cassian's commander was obviously doing some shady stuff, doing things that trying to undermine other members of the rebellion so that he could get his orders in. Because the rebellion are the good guys, it doesn't mean that everyone is automatically good. I think I've kind of repeated that point a few times at this point, but to really sum this up, Avatar: The Last Airbender and Star Wars do have a lot of similarities, and you can definitely see that Avatar: The Last Airbender did pull from Star Wars for a lot of inspiration. And, if you're going to pull from something, pull from good stuff, especially a lot of the original trilogy. So even though it does have, even though Star Wars, even all the way even through episodes 1 through 6, they do feel different than Avatar in terms of how they approach morality, because a lot of it comes down to individual cases, because I think they do take a stand in that, morality is important. Both of them do, in that you can't just sacrifice morality for victory, because, then what are you left with? You've broken, your morality, and how do you go back from that? So you do have some more complicated stuff, like with Han in the original trilogy and his ultimate, character arc, not just in A New Hope, but across the series, where you start seeing him basically open up about being a nicer guy. You do have a lot of stuff that is basic, because shoot, they still shoot stormtroopers who, it's not like all stormtroopers are just evil. A lot of them are, just soldiers of the Empire. A lot of them are fed propaganda. Some of them are probably just doing it for a job. But since the whole thing is set up in a very simple way, it's good guys versus bad guys, the stormtroopers are trying to kill the good guys, so when they fire back and hit stormtroopers, well, this is the stuff that is kind of messy in war. And it's funny that even though, not really thinking about it, the original trilogy, despite the fact that it does set up a very black and white scenario, it does have a bit of, it does have, shades of gray, in the certain parts when you really think about it. Especially when you get to, Obi-Wan, telling him, Luke, you gotta kill Vader. And he's like, I know. But it's even more interesting when you take in the prequels and you saw that Obi-Wan's refusal to kill Vader. And you can even see this stuff like this with like Roku, where Roku refused to kill Sozin because he didn't want how can you mortally kill your best friend? Even if he's doing something shady, it's like he gave him a warning, don't do this. But when push came to shove, Sozin saw the opportunity to off Roku and took it. So then, Roku, like Obi-Wan, was just like, no, you gotta finish and fix the things that I messed up on. Because they see that, not killing them was, they see that as a mistake. It's a complicated situation. So, yeah, while the prequels do delve more, the prequel era, I think as a whole, delves more into a lot of gray areas, especially given the nature of the Clone Wars. I think, I still think that both the prequel era and the original trilogy era and Avatar era do share a lot of similarities. And Avatar probably looks like it, if you ask me, it kind of takes both from the the original trilogy and the prequel era in terms of inspiration in that regard. But it does maintain some stronger morals, particularly the original trilogy. The prequels were less about morality than the original trilogy was. And, with Avatar, they do have a lot of moral lessons. Occasionally they falter on that. I think we can all admit that The Great Divide's moral lesson of lying is good as long as you get what you want. Yeah, no, not very good. But it does have, Avatar does have a lot of the, morals of, some of it's more basic stuff like stealing is bad, don't commit murder. Even though they wrap up in a lot of morally gray, situations, Avatar: The Last Airbender does maintain a lot of, strong commitments on morality. And I think the strong, because, and even another good episode to look at for that is the Southern Raiders, when Zuko helps Katara find the man who killed her mother so that she can exact her bloody revenge on him. So despite the fact that, even Sokka and Aang are telling her not to do that, that, revenge isn't going to help anyone, ultimately she does keep to her morals despite her anger and hatred towards the guy of, not killing him. Because when you really think about it, what would make, if she did that, what makes her better than him? She's still killing someone who, at that point, that guy was, just a pathetic, bum who, he couldn't really defend himself, especially not against Book 3 Katara. So you do have a lot of these commitments to these morals, which is nice to see, because, I think a lot of media just is like, hey guys, morals are for chumps. And, they end up delving into the grimdark territory, and I'm not a fan of. But yeah, Star Wars and Avatar both seem to be cut from a similar cloth in the regards of their approach to the fantasy. They're good guys, they're bad guys, and there is a sense of morality in it, in that it does stick to that instead of saying, instead of trying to be edgy and like, oh, you gotta kill in order to save people, like, Man of Steel, where Clark kills Zod even though he really could have flown him out of there instead of just snapping his neck. But that's a whole different can of worms, talking about some of the grimdark stuff and bad movies. But yeah, I think that's about it for today, discussing the morality. I think I've talked enough about this. So if you want to submit a topic to me, you can comment below if you're on YouTube, or if you're on Tumblr, send me an ask and put topic : and then whatever topic you want me to talk about. Just make sure to follow the rules that I'll be posting down below. If you want to watch last week's topic video, you can check that out here. If you want to watch next week's topic video, you can check that out here when I get that done. So if there's anything else that you want to say about the morality and the good and bad dichotomy in Star Wars or Avatar: The Last Airbender, please comment below. And thank you for watching.